And so Bret Contreras had a difficult decision to make. Either he calls himself the glute guy or Dr. Booty. He made the dignified choice. So this week in the news, Jack Black, aka Jablinski, beat YouTube with a 50-second video that got him 1 million subscribers in a week. Therefore, I will be putting some subliminal messaging within this video, but don't worry, it'll be very subtle in a hope that I can hit that trending algorithm. I think I did a pretty good job with the thumbnail. Subscribe. John Jones introduced the word picogram into many of our vernacular, or what he calls a pictogram.
John Jones is calling it a pictogram, for Christ's sake.
And I introduced the word adherence into your vernacular. And that keyword of adherence, oh dear. Bret Contreras says that the hip thrust is the main lift. And so if you don't know Bret Contreras, he's a PhD in sports science. However, he does not throw the doctorate at you, unlike Mr. 4% Body Fat. He's also an expert in glute development, and thereby the hip thrust exercise is his main area of specialism. And without doubt, this is a highly intelligent man. And if there was such a thing as an expert into a specific lift, he most certainly is when it comes to the hip thrust. Now, he's sparked some controversy because he said in his recent YouTube video that the hip thrust is the main lift.
Military press, rows, bench, chin-ups. Now, I love those lifts and they're a staple to me, but make no mistake about it, the hip thrust is numero uno. Now, what if you're a female and you want nice glutes? That's your #1 goal. Well, then shouldn't the hip thrust be the main lift?
And so traditionally, the hip thrust is an exercise which you may have seen performed mostly by women. Men may be put off by the hip thrust as it's seen as a more female exercise. I actually don't like that. I don't like the segregation of exercises according to gender. I think it's too old-fashioned and we need to be more open-minded, and that's why I really wanted to make this video. And without doubt, there are people who are set in their ways of training. There is a set gym culture in many ways, and whilst the major compound lifts, your bench, your deadlift, squats, etc. are absolutely great lifts, who is to say that the hip thrust cannot be viewed as a main lift? And Bret did reference this in his video when he talked about Jim Wendler, who said this.
With Jim Wendler, someone who I used to highly respect, and he was talking about how the hip thrust should not be a main lift.
And then I saw hip thrust in there, and I was like, when the did this happen? Like, at what point, like, what world do I live in now where the hip thrust is the same thing as a deadlift? And I just got such a kick out of that.
Now, this is disappointing for a number of reasons.
Subscribe. And so most certainly there is a stigma attached to certain exercises, rightly or wrongly, and I think we really need to break free of these chains, and we need to create our own reality in the gym. We need to program our training according to ourselves and ignore the noise. Do you? The hip thrust is a loaded glute bridge movement with the back resting on a bench, which increases the exercise's range of motion. It is most commonly loaded with a barbell, elastic resistance bands, or a combination of the two. Biomechanically, the hip thrust is a horizontally loaded bent leg hip extension exercise with a peak level of contraction where the muscles are shortest and with consistent tension placed on the hips throughout. These features make it ideal for developing strength in short muscle lengths and also for maximizing muscular hypertrophy of the gluteus maximus. So essentially it's a gluteus maximus loading exercise, although it does work that posterior chain and it does also activate hamstring groups, etc. But really, it is the glute exercise. And this is what Dr. Eddie Joe had to say about it. In comparison to common axially, vertically loaded hip extension exercises, the hip thrust allows the glutes to be effectively loaded as the vector of the load and gravity directly opposes the vector of the movement generated by the glute's hip extension. The barbell variation is superior than the banded and American variations, specifically for glute max activation. And so there are many ways you can perform the hip thrust. However, the barbell version of the lift is most certainly scientifically supported as an effective exercise for glute activation. Subscribe. And so let's start with some of the positives, perhaps supporting Bret's opinion that this is the main lift. Now, this is a posterior chain movement, and absolutely many people neglect the posterior chain within their training. And it is a multi-joint compound lift, and Bret does say that it is a safe lift as long as it's performed correctly. And he also importantly highlights how it's easy to progressively overload the lift, which is essential to muscle growth. And here is what he says.
And most of all, it's very well suited for progressive overload. An exercise is judged by how it's done right, not by the people who screw it up. So let's not be fooled by powerlifter terminology or powerlifter mindset.
Not bad, Bret. Decent sunglasses joke. However, you should consult me as your gag man. I literally have 7 glute jokes that you can use.
Now, I've seen all these big, strong men make fun of lunges and make fun of hip thrusts. I'd like to see those guys to do a 405 pound for 20 rep hip thrust with good form, and tell me what you feel afterwards.
But by making this statement, Bret is going against the grain, and for me, it shows how important personalizing your training is, and how we shouldn't get caught up in perhaps in too much traditionalism, and we need to program according to what we need to do. And developing your glutes can be important. It can be a weakness within your squat. Weak glutes may lead to a falling forwards type position during the barbell back squat. Now, it might not be the direct cause, as it's a compound lift, as the squat is a compound movement, and there can be many contributing factors to that tilting forwards that Blaha does. However, weak glutes can be a contributing factor. Therefore, a hip thrust may help to develop that, which can then transfer to other lifts. So that's just one example of why a hip thrust may be useful to you. And I, for one, will be doing more and more barbell hip thrusts within my training to develop the buns of steel.
Oh, you want to see the thunderclap?
Yeah, there he goes.
And so, gentlemen, you don't have to wear yoga pants. You don't even have to wear a Gymshark hoodie. But perhaps we need to drop this stigma and create our own culture and reality when we train. And Bret makes a great point about real body typing, not V-shred somatotypes. Real body typing being the length of your femurs, which can relate to how you deadlift and squat. That absolutely, the ergonomics of your limbs absolutely affects those major compounds.
Thrusts are easy to learn. They're well suited for every body type. In contrast, some human bodies just aren't well suited to squat or deadlift, especially if you have relatively long femurs for the squat or relatively short arms for the deadlift. You're placing yourself at greater injury risk.
And here is the best part of the video.
This is Massa, this is Jade, this is Jax, here's Nikki,
Good
here's
stuff,
Alexis.
Bret. Good stuff. So looking at the argument against what Bret is saying, well, of course he has bias. This is his area of research and focus, the glutes, and the hip thrust is the exercise which he dedicates himself to. So of course there's bias in what he's saying, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad thing, because this exercise is a very useful exercise. Not like some of these other guys who will do a lunge with rotation and try and patent that to be some sort of unique form of training. And whilst we are on that other guy, he actually says this about the hip thrust. And I'm thinking a peer review on that man might be quite useful. Certain exercises can have certain benefits to you. For example, the hip thrust allows a loading of the glutes. As I've said, it may not be the most directly functional movement when you look at your daily activities and movements throughout your day. However, by loading those glutes effectively and activating them, it allows you to strengthen them. But I don't like the term the main lift. I don't believe there is one main lift. I don't like comparing exercises. That's a philosophical point of mine. Every exercise is different, even within exercise groups. A narrower grip on the bench press is a different exercise to a wider grip on the bench press. We should view exercises in isolation. They are different to each other. And so, whilst yes, the compounds are great exercises, they give you so much bang for your buck, and the hip thrust is also a very good exercise. There is no main lift. There are just many, many good exercises that you can use for specific reasons. But I don't actually think that Bret was saying that it is the main lift, despite the title of his video, despite what he was saying. I think he was just trying to draw some light upon the exercise. And I think by making those statements, he was just trying to get people to actually think about a lift, which they may normally brush off. And Bret is smart enough to know that you have to use a range of exercises. So for sure, I don't think we should literally take his title as it's written. I think we need to read between the lines and understand that this video is trying to project to the masses the importance of a lift that may have been historically ignored, specifically by men. And in addition, he uses these surveys in his video, which I don't really like the comparisons, but again, he's just trying to give you more information about his lift by using data, which is a good thing. However, I don't like comparing exercises, and therefore I believe I just lost my train of thought. I believe I can fly. There, let's go with that. And so the hip thrust is not the main lift. But I don't actually think Bret was making such a black and white statement. I think what he was trying to say is open your mind remove some of the stigma and the dogma within traditional training, the unwritten rules in the gym, and train according to what will develop and progress you in this new year. And so I absolutely agree with Bret that the hip thrust, and specifically the barbell variation, is extremely beneficial to you, and you should consider putting it into your training plan. And therefore I'm giving Bret a big thumbs up for his video. I'm James Linker, Shredded Sports Science. I'll see you soon.